And now, marine weather around Alaska. Thank you for joining me, and this is the Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024. Our outlook is for Wednesday into Thursday, the midweek period, but we start off with this Tuesday afternoon's ice edge. We still have ice within Kuskokwim Bay, and the ice edge extends westward there, surrounding Nunavik Island all the way out to just west and south there of St. Matthew. And with the way the winds are going to be shaping up here, going through the midweek period, there's going to be more of an easterly offshore flow. So we don't expect the ice to advance any farther southward, but it could advance a little westward with the easterly flow across the eastern Bering Sea and off of the mainland. And otherwise, we just anticipate the normal seasonal melt to be underway, as we are expecting maybe a little warmer temperatures in through that region as we end the month and head into the first few days of May. So low pressure was down around below 970 millibars last night. As of this Tuesday afternoon, low is centered across the central Bering Sea at 973 millibars. The initial lead occluded front now is just kind of washing out as a trough along the west coast to St. Lawrence Island, where there still is a winter weather advisory in effect until late this Tuesday night for some snow and blowing snow. Secondary low development, not an impressive system as we sometimes see in the winter time. Weak area of high pressure, southern mainland, northern Gulf. That feature will persist into Wednesday afternoon. And we have the secondary low southwest of the Gulf, with the main low still out in the central Bering, gradually filling and weakening with the remnants of that front as a trough along the west coast. And another secondary trough pushing in through the central portion of the Aleutians, which will shift winds more to the west-northwest behind it and be southwesterly ahead of it. For Thursday, still weak high pressure, southern mainland. That secondary low sitting just along the lower Gulf, North Pacific interface, but not much of that's really going to come of that. And then the low that was out over the central Bering begins to head southeastward as it weakens. This low will cross the eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula very late Thursday night and during Friday morning, and then emerge here into the North Pacific, where at least as of now going into the weekend, it should stay south of the Gulf. So our forecast marine-wise here for the inner channels of the Panhandle: north winds to 10 knots. For Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, waves a foot or two. South winds to 10 knots around Ketchikan, Metlakatla, down through Dixon Entrance. For the outer coast, west to northwest winds right around 10 knots, swells 4 to 5 feet on Wednesday. For Thursday, winds will turn more easterly there along Lynn Canal to 10 knots, southeast winds to 10 knots, Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance. And then some sort of east, northeast, or northerly offshore flow along the coastline of the Gulf at 10 knots with swells of only 4 or 5 feet. Winds will also be rather light and variable across areas of the Gulf and Upper Cook Inlet. We expect variable winds around 10 knots, Prince William Sound, northern portion of Cook Inlet, and the area outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Strongest winds easterly to 20 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet with swells of 4 to 5 feet. For Thursday, we look for the winds in lower Cook Inlet and the entrance there, Kennedy Entrance, 20 knot southeast winds with swells of 4 to 5 feet. And as we get up again along the upper portion of Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, and the area of the Gulf outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, just variable winds around 10 knots, waves running generally a couple of feet at best. Wednesday, we'll see southeast to east winds 15 to 20 knots around Kodiak Island. As we go down along the Alaska Peninsula, there is going to be a trough or diminishing front through the central peninsula, so ahead of it, easterly component to the wind, but once you get south of that front, the winds will turn more southerly and be as high as 20 to 25 knots around Cold Bay and False Pass. Come Thursday, look for south to southeast winds 15 knots around Kodiak Island, and as we trail out down along the Alaska Peninsula, look for winds to generally have some sort of southerly component, 15 to 20 knots. Across the Aleutian chain Wednesday, we're going to have south-southwest winds around 25 knots for the eastern central Aleutians. Once you get west of Atka through Adak, winds start to shift back to the west. I showed you that trough that'll be pivoting through the central Bering or central Aleutians on Wednesday, and that'll shift winds to the west-northwest at 25 to 30 knots, especially west of Adak through Kiska and Shemya. And then on Thursday, as that low continues to drift southeastward and weaken, The strongest wind core and highest waves will be just to the southwest of the center of the low, north of the central Aleutians. Look for southwest to west winds 20-25 knots over the eastern Aleutians, but once we get around Atka and Adak, they pick back up to the west 25 to 30 knots from Atka through Adak back toward Kiska, and waves could run as high as 10, 12, maybe even 15 feet there north of Atka and Adak. Along the southwest coast, look for southeast winds to 20 knots there within Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays. Southeast winds 20 to 25 knots coming off the lower Yukon Delta and the wider part here of Norton Sound. East winds to 30 knots around St. Matthew could cause the ice to drift a little further westward, but south winds St. Paul, St. George to 25 knots, so that ice edge will not be advancing southward with that kind of wind field. And then for Thursday, generally offshore flow, east-southeast winds 10 to 15 knots along the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay. And look for northeast winds to 15 knots around St. Matthew and southeast winds to 15 knots in the vicinity of the Pribilof Islands with swells there, maybe 5 to 7 feet. So from the northern Bering Sea through the Bering Strait, through the lower Chukchi Sea, we expect easterly winds 20 to 25 knots. As we round up north of, from around Cape Lisburn up through Utqiagvik, east to Kaktovik, generally easterly winds around 15 to 20 knots. And come Thursday, those easterly winds will increase to 25 to 30 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast from Utqiagvik, or I should say from Wainwright, through Utqiagvik and Kaktovik. But as we drop down through the lower Chukchi Sea, through the Bering Strait, and into the north side of St. Lawrence Island, winds will generally be out of the east at 10 to 15 knots.